Hello there. Emily took me to see a show last night. I'm not going to say the name of the show because that's bad luck, apparently. But I'm going to say this. I'm not going to try and act, but these words. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, I came back and those words stuck in my ear. Now, what's that all about? And then I woke up this morning and on the radio we hear that today the Transport Minister has resigned following a forgot to tell employer hadn't lost business mobile phone confusion prosecution. And I thought this all makes real sense. The bard was right. Welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And I'm Kieren McCarthy in London.
Coming up today, the British Minister Pat McFadden tells NATO that Russia is waging a cyber war. Is cyber scaremongering, or is this a rebranding of what's been happening for a long time? For those of you who dread using the Uber app, you have a fellow sufferer. I avoid using Uber as much as possible. Recently in Germany, I was forced to use it again, and I have some feedback to share. And finally, the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, it was the past. Is it now the future of the Internet? Great. First of all, please join us. Please share, like, and follow us. That always helps. The links are on the screen now, but please click below or above or wherever you are and wherever you're looking or listening to this podcast. So first of all, we'll start with the British Minister. Kieren, before you ask Emily these questions about the British Minister, who is Pat McFadden? He's the
he's got the longest title in the world.
Duchy of...
Okay, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Kieren, do you know what that means?
Does that mean?
Do you know what that job is?
He's just a cabinet minister, isn't he?
Yeah. Is it like we couldn't figure out what to
I lived in the US
something.
for a long time, so although I'm English, I've come back. I've still not got used to some of these things. So when I hear these ridiculous things, I think, oh God, it's a bit embarrassing.
It does sound like the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster should be making biscuits or something for Waitrose.
Yeah, of course, yes. The kind of thing you'd have on a Fortnum and Mason's biscuit tin.
Delicious. Is that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster's biscuits?
Anyway, he's very important.
Sounds very important. That's the important
very
bit.
important.
Kieran, you were going to ask Emily about this. He's told NATO that Russia is waging a cyber war.
Yeah, so I'm interested. I think, or at least the trailing of it was all about AI and talking about AI. And I wondered, was that the actual speech, or was that the sort of the getting in the papers part of the speech? And then what was he actually on about?
I don't know, Kieren, because it was trailed like, Cybergeddon and all of the stuff that was current about 10 or 15 years ago. And
Sorry, what do you mean by Cybergeddon?
Cybergeddon. So about 10 or 15 years ago, a couple of really senior people stood up and went, guys, the cybers are very frightening, and planes could fall out of the sky. We could all be literally dead in 1 minute due to cyber attacks.
Oh, this is like the millennium bug. This reminds me of a close family relative who I won't name. We all love each other, family. But he kept talking about this sort of, that lifts are going to drop out of the sky.
I remember being in a lift actually on New Year's Eve on the Millennium in Canary Wharf and thinking, oh my God, I hope the millennium bug doesn't kill us this lift.
Make the lift explode.
Yeah.
This is a bit of software.
Yeah. So, Kieren, So I was kind of phoned up all weekend by media outlets saying, what do you think about Pat McFadden saying there's a cyber war? And all of the normal commentators were nowhere to be seen. And so, of course, being a fool, I just stepped in where others feared to tread. But you're right, there was a big difference between the trail, which was like, we're at cyber war with Russia, which I thought was an incredible thing to say. When you look at the speech itself, it's much more careful. It's and yeah, you're right. There is the announcement that the UK government is putting 8 million or so into a new AI defence type of thing to help NATO. That's one thing. Another thing, maybe more significantly, is about sort of collective defence on cyber, which the UK is announcing a new incident response project. So those were the sort of announcement bits. But what's he saying about cyber war? So from the kind of Cybergeddon scare stories, which you can really get caught out, because if you're asked, well, is it possible for a cyber attack to take out, say, a whole healthcare system or the whole of a country's power? The answer is obviously yes, right? But that sounds incredibly... It sounds like you're just like scaremongering, though. Because
I wonder if this is tied in with because China, the US Senate Intelligence Committee said that China had managed to get into their bugging systems, and they'd found out that China was this thing. And then, of course, we've got a lot going on in Ukraine and Russia right now. And then, Putin has started warmongering a little bit, or at least putting those noises out there.
Yeah.
I do wonder how much of this is sort of, PR, and then how much this was already planned. I mean, 8 million in what did this say, 8 million in an AI program? I mean, that'll be eaten up.
Yeah, that's like going to last 5 minutes. Yeah. And so what I've been like really trying to work out what's going on, because clearly in a war, Russia and Ukraine are at war. There is a cyber element of that. It's not controversial to say that the Ukraine is suffering, as Pat McFadden does in his speech. There's a hidden war Russia is waging in Ukraine on the cyber side. But he's also saying they're widening their approach against members of NATO and calls out some attacks against the UK and other NATO members. And so he's sort of eliding this idea that cyber things done in the warfare situation between Ukraine and Russia are also kind of war against NATO, which is an enormous thing to say, because normally cyber attacks are thought to fall below the threshold for warfare.
Can you see? I mean, we have a lot of where we're going is saying, we've been saying for a long time that the virtual world and the real world need to be combined, especially with laws of things like encouraging violence and so on and so forth. It would be, what's your thoughts? Connecting cyber war and real war, as in with equivalence.
Yeah,
that's a dangerous connection.
It is a dangerous connection. But on the other hand, the UN countries have all agreed a set of norms to say don't attack other people's critical infrastructure with cyber, right? That's a norm. Every country's signed up to it. That is a thing that the open-ended working group agreed back in 2021, but nobody's worked out. So what if you breach that, which Russia does all the time, okay? Yeah. All the time. And I wondered, maybe I'm overthinking it, whether Pat McFadden is actually trying to change the legal analysis in some way and say, actually, there has to be a consequence for just constantly flouting these internationally agreed norms. There has to be an answer. You can't just have one country that just doesn't stick by the rules. And so maybe he's trying to kind of, get NATO a bit more on it. I think this is also, Lucien, as much about Trump as it is about Putin, because this is, Kieren was saying this is a terrible moment for the Ukraine war, one where there could be escalation, but also, Trump's going to come in a couple of months. He's proven to be pretty friendly to Vladimir Putin and very hostile to NATO. So I've noticed a lot of kind of NATO members, foreign ministers the last week, were all saying, yeah, we're all standing together. We're going to be more self-reliant. We're not going to be relying on, America so much, and we're going to put in more money. So there's a sort of moment for NATO before it's too late, maybe, to actually stand together.
Oh, so one of there's a part of this is the fact that the traditional adversaries of the West have just got much better at it. I mean, the UK and the Five Eyes, especially in cyber, were always vastly superior in terms of their capabilities. And now the truth is, as we've seen, China is probably the best at this. That's the awful truth. And Russia's pretty good. So I wonder whether there's a redrawing here simply because the adversaries have got much better.
Yeah, and also, of course, all of the espionage activities you associate with Russia and China, they can break into critical infrastructure because they do it all the time to get positions for spying. Once you can do that, you're in, aren't you? So you could do anything. You could spy, but you could do something more constructive. Lucien's just not talking.
No.
He's not talking.
No, I've been
and
told
he's
not
just...
to compare something, and I've been told to wait for my question.
So now he's punishing
this
everyone.
Is all very... No,
like,
I'm not punishing
you go
everyone.
Ahead. You just talk.
I'm fascinated about this. I've
Sure
got things to say.
Well, the big question is if, let's say, let's use a hypothetical, if Russia hacks into a critical piece of infrastructure in, say, the US, or no, let's say in a NATO country, Belgium. Is Belgium in NATO? Must be.
Yeah, isn't it? Oh, I don't know.
Then does that mean we can send a missile into Russia? I mean, are we talking real equivalence here?
There is some precedent for that. So Israel a few years ago sent some missiles against Hamas over a cyber attack, but that's the only real kind of kinetic response I know of to a cyber attack. It's very rare.
I honestly don't understand any of this, or particularly what you're talking about, but we've used up half the time, so we've actually got to move on. But all I feel is that if you're attacking hospitals and if you're attacking banks and if you're attacking infrastructure, that is the same as dropping a bomb on a school or on a hospital. And it seems to me that NATO is sort of saying, if you're going to carry on doing that, that's not secret, sneaky, Cold War, spiesy stuff where we all try
it's
and...
not cool.
We all try and play this sort of cock length with each other. It's actually war.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to carry on doing that, taking out hospitals and stopping people having operations. In Ireland, they had a nightmare with that. That is an attack on NATO, a NATO member. And if you do that, that's an act of war against us.
Yeah, I think that's
a
right.
big
It's
deal.
sort of throwing down the gauntlet. I think you're right, Luce, because until now, I think a lot of the NATO members have gone, we don't want to get drawn into an armed conflict because of cyber attacks. So they've really played it down and done some kind of like coordinated calling out. That hasn't worked in any way to deter the activity. So now it's a bit of a gauntlet. Maybe it's because they don't want Putin to escalate attacks against NATO because of the use of missiles in Ukraine.
Next up, we're going to be talking, I'm going to be whinging about Uber, which I love doing really. Musk and Uber, I sort of alternate between the two of them. Before I do that, it's time for our Guilty Pleasure Online. I really do love this kind of nightclub thing, Charlie.
Really
I
nice,
absolutely love this. And Charlie's our sound engineer, but he's also our wonderful voice of God. Charlie, you're going to have a go at a Guilty Pleasure Online. What's your Guilty Pleasure Online?
My Guilty Pleasure Online, hello the internet, nice to see you again, is old geezers talking about music and doing music stuff.
Is that Lucien?
Yes, I just
really,
watch.
This is really,
I just watch videos of Lucien talking about his days in a punk band.
Okay. This is the moment where
slobs.
Igor is away because of an emergency family matter. But this is where he gets up a picture of me sitting on a car in some band.
Yeah, in 1999.
So
very cool.
Talking of me being, talking of sad facts about me, I want to do a public apology. So maybe this isn't a guilty pleasure moment. This is a public apology. Okay, I'd like to apologise for what I said last week about watch repairers. When I talked about sad things on YouTube, I was talking about me being sad watching things on YouTube. I didn't want to suggest that people talking about watches on YouTube were sad in any way. I have huge admiration for all sorts of normal people who make YouTube videos about all sorts of fascinating things: dog grooming, watch repairs, little bits of cars. Here comes a watch online. I think we're about to see the watch that I was talking about. online. You know, this is not fair. Any innuendo that I find people who talk about normal things without sort of actors' trained voices and all of this sort of rubbish is in any way sad is not true at all. I humbly apologise.
I want to find out more about the geezers that Charlie was talking about. Which geezers are you talking about? Which ones are your top favourites?
So it's usually, it will be just like an old, I don't know, media composer who has been in the industry for like years and years, and he's like really, really good with tech, and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's able to be like, yeah, so what you want to do is you want to, you know, make sure this is plugged in, and you're just going to write a piece of music, and it just makes me really happy, because I'm like, if you know what you're doing, and you do your research and you know how tech and software works, you can be any age, any demographic, and you can learn or just understand how it works. And it just makes me happy.
Yeah, and I love YouTube for learning. Maybe there's a YouTube video on how to use Uber if you've once been flagged as a bad actor, Lucien. Is there
That's
something?
a very,
is
very
there something?
smart
Was
bridge.
that a nice bridge?
Well, let's be
could you
fair.
just?
Before I just go straight into the whinge, let's try and be fair about, you know, what problem was Uber trying to solve?
Kieren, are you an Uber user?
Yeah, the early days of Uber was sensational.
Sensational.
It
I
was
still love
fantastic because
watching
taxis
the
were a
little-
pain.
Yeah.
You had to book them. They overcharged.
Yeah,
You know,
they wouldn't turn
the only
up.
place
You
where
didn't
it
know
worked-
if they were turning up or not.
No, often they wouldn't turn up.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare.
Nightmare.
I mean, there's two
ridiculous.
things. There's two things in Oxford that are broken. One is restaurants. They're all crap. They're just oversubscribed. They're full of students,
We
which
went
is
to a
great.
good one last
There's one
week.
good one.
Very nice.
Number one Ship Street in Oxford is great. Please don't overwhelm it because I won't be able to go there anymore. It's awful. What was the Indian one we went to, which I love, Dishoom in London.
But it was so
fantastic.
packed out. It was great.
And
Food.
it's food fantastic. But we went in at 8:00. We were served peanuts for an hour and a half, and then an hour and a half later they served the food, and we just wanted to go to bed. And so Oxford has these two huge problems. One is restaurants are absolutely dire, and number two is taxi services. The taxis are captured by they get themselves all onto the local council, and they make sure that Uber cannot arrive in Oxford. Now,
Uber's good then, Lucien.
that's a good and bad thing. Okay,
Why don't you share your experience of Uber and just get it out
Well,
there
my experience
for
of
everyone?
not Uber, why I should like Uber,
Yeah.
is because it runs... The thing that's terrible about the taxi services in Oxford is there's no administration. So if my mother-in-law comes around for a dinner, she has a couple of drinks, and we want to put her in a taxi, you have to ring up and you have to be lucky. And there's certain areas of Oxford where the taxis won't come because they can get better fares elsewhere. And if you book a taxi, that means absolutely nothing at
Nothing.
all. Okay. Whereas Uber, you book it, you watch it
I
come in
love
and stuff
watching the
like
little
that.
car on the Uber
Yeah, so
app. It's
the-
lovely.
The problem started in 2022 in Washington, where I was looking forward to using my Uber app, and basically I was setting up the app because I had to use it for business travel in Washington.
And were you excited?
I was totally thrilled.
Loved
I
it.
love a new app, and I
Yeah,
love things that
yeah.
enable.
And
I
you're
was
quite
excited
technical, aren't you? Quite technical,
And I
Lucy.
really bloody know what I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
so
yeah. So
anyway,
what happened then?
I
I
added
reckon you got into a cab with someone who loves watch repairs.
This is really, this is going
And
to
they
run
were
and
like,
run.
"I'm gonna get that guy."
Yeah, and if they love watch repairs, I love them. Anyway, I was adding a credit card to the account. For some reason, it didn't like something on the way. I got no feedback. I kept contacting help, and eventually help was sending me defamatory messages about being a scammer, and they don't like scams, and it sort of ended any conversation, and they decided that I was a scammer. Okay, and I couldn't unlock that at all. I tried different cards, I tried deleting cards, and it seemed the more I did, it sort of
the more you were behaving like a scammer.
Yeah, it formed the view that I was a scammer, and it's just shit software. It was just written without really being able. It had taken me down a rabbit hole. I couldn't get out of it, but also they wouldn't talk to me because they don't talk to scammers. So they just, judge and jury.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hacked it by opening a business account, hooking the same card into a business account, all perfectly legitimate.
If Uber's listening to this, they're gonna get your business account now.
And well, I didn't really hack it. I just set up a business account, put the same card on that, and I managed to talk to a business manager because they talk to
and they're
people
like, oh
because
God,
you're a business, and many of our staff are using Uber, so they don't want us to walk away from the whole thing. And they went, oh, what a clever thing to do. That's a really good way of getting round our shit software. So anyway, I thought this was all sorted, but in Germany the other day, log in. I forget to log in through my business profile, and I logged in through my personal profile, treated like a criminal still immediately, with the same card that is also associated with one of my business accounts, because you can hook any card in. Absolute effing mess. Absolutely terrible.
Now that you've got that off your chest, are you feeling better?
I haven't got it off my chest. I think we're using up a lot of time. If we've got another hour, then I can satisfy my sort of...
Kieren, do you love
and next
Uber?
week in Lucien Rants.
Kieren, you're down in London where everything just works.
Everything works in London.
Do you love Uber?
No.
You said you used to like it. When it was first introduced, you loved it, and now something's changed.
There's various infuriating things with it, but the most infuriating is, it depends how they set it up, but I will often have Uber drivers accept, the trip. So you say, great, and often you're planning things to get there on time, and then they'll say, actually, no, I've changed my mind, and then drop you. And then you go, then you worry like, well, if I choose another one, will they also drop me? So then you switch to a different app. So it's got to the point where it's a little bit like in London. I don't know if you've lived in London, where cab drivers in the north used to go, I ain't going south.
Not going south.
But now Uber drivers like, no, I fancy going here now, so I'm just going to accept your ride and then drop you when I've changed my mind. And that is really infuriating. It causes all kinds of problems. So
Katie and I had a thing in San Francisco, didn't we, Katie? Where
Katie is standing in for Eagle today. She produces
She's probably concentrating hard at the moment because she's got an awful lot going on. But we ordered an Uber, and we knew we said it's like there's 5 or 6 of us, so we wanted a bigger car. And he arrived with a small car, and we were like, well, obviously
it said
that's wrong.
Five
and we
people.
said we had 5 passengers. You can only take however many. And then he did the journey as if we were in the car. Without us. And I did actually complain to Uber. Katie said, don't cancel the trip because they'll charge you. Complain instead. And she got me to take pictures of me with the screenshot of the Uber driver doing our route and me still in the car park waiting for them. So, and actually I took it up with Uber and they were great and they refunded it.
I challenge you on that.
Okay.
Uber were great giving you a refund, but that was a crime.
It was.
That was a crime, and you had evidence. Did they ask you for the evidence? Did they do anything about it? That's a person who's scamming people, who's doing a trip, taking the money, and not actually giving people a journey. Oh. And I think that sort of indifference with Uber, that sort of distance from what's really happening, is quite toxic. Yeah. So anyway, going on to the next thing, it's time for our Tech Room 101.
Who's doing the Room 101? Is it you?
Yeah.
Kieren, why don't you ask Lucien what is Tech Room 101? Is it Uber?
What today for Tech Room 101?
Kieren, have you got a Room 101?
And not as many as Lucien.
I'm not going to say. I did have one, but I'm not going to say. I've been.
Go on.
Go
I've been shamed by Kieren.
Have you been shamed? Yeah, I mean, maybe if we did a little chart
if you're
of the
bully
number of
people
room
online, then I'm not
101s
going to
from
say
the
anything.
different members of the team, I think somebody would be out in the lead.
Somebody's generous and preparing before
And
they
sharing,
come.
and sharing.
And sharing.
Have you
their
got something
innermost
to
thoughts.
share with us this
No,
week?
I'm not going to say. So this week,
Kieren, have you got-
our Tech Room 101 is not declared.
Undeclared, blimey. Okay.
Undeclared.
Okay, moving on. Kieren, the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, it was the past. Is it now the future of the internet?
Yeah, so for some reason, I've been thinking a lot about the IETF recently. And the reason is it felt like not that long ago that it was in the doldrums. And there was a lot of other tech. The way you can measure the IETF's effectiveness is the number of RFCs, i.e.
Sorry, can you just unpack a little bit of
Yes,
this?
so the IETF
What is the
Internet
IETF and what are RFCs, just quickly?
Yeah, the IETF is the Internet Engineering Task Force, and it fundamentally creates standards for the internet. And it's a sort of a multi-stakeholder body put together by internet engineers, and it was the original body that helped
And the standards are like HTML, HTTPS, these sort of things that we come up with in browser bars, how web pages are written, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and obviously is much more advanced these days, but all the things that make the internet work. And the big focus these days is usually around security, sort of improving security on the internet. So it's an interesting body that runs in a peculiar but a very interesting way. But in recent years, big tech, your Googles and Amazons and Microsofts and so on and so forth, have been developing their own standards, and they've seen this as being very valuable for them. And so the IETF has somewhat lost its sort of its strength.
And just to be clear, from my point of view as an engineer about standards, you had things like MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS, which a lot of engineers say led to many of the disasters we've had, even lately with sort of CrowdStrike and stuff, having to protect Microsoft from its own crap system, where it basically branched and created low-level basic interoperability, basic input-output systems of its own because they were cooler and more about what they wanted. And so they developed proprietary standards that then they offered to the world as a standard, but it wasn't agreed with everybody. It was just cooler for them. Would you agree?
Yes, and there's the advantage of having a much broader standard, lots of people's eyeballs on a standard, is you tend to pick out the holes and make it more interoperable. It's a better way of doing things. But for big tech companies, obviously they would prefer to have their standard in control because then they get a level of market control. And that's been the way that it's going. But recently, I think particularly with the sort of geopolitical troubles that we're having right now, I hear a lot of people talking more strongly and with sort of greater enthusiasm about the IETF. So, for example, at DNSRF, we're about to start on a piece of work looking at how to engage more companies within the IETF. And then I'm on the board of Nominate that runs .uk, and we were talking about this week about greater engagement with the IETF. And then also, quite interesting recently, like Blue Sky, which is now the new sexy app, they have a protocol which people are criticizing them over. So then in order to gain acceptance for their protocol, they said, well, we're going to push it forward into the IETF. And that basically pushing it to the IETF was a shorthand for we are part of you. We're part of the internet community. And so I get the feeling that the IETF is about to become fashionable again, because we are entering a slightly difficult period. And big tech, I think, is realizing it actually does need to work a little bit more across the internet. And we're getting a little bit worried about things breaking apart in different parts of the world.
Emily,
I
I sense this. I feel this. Emily, how many women are in the IETF? How is that? How representative is that at the moment? Is that all solved now? We were talking about this some time ago.
I think it's hard to be a woman in the IETF. There's the group Sisters, which our own Carolina Cairo is a co-chair of. So there are some women in the IETF. It's difficult to be a woman in the IETF. You have to be an incredibly resilient person. You have to put up with just sort of thoughtless sexism. And
I
being
think also
talked down
with-
to
yeah.
just because of your gender.
And I don't think
I'm
that's
also
just to women, though,
suspicious.
is it?
I think it's to any outsider. I mean, I would not fit in at all at IETF, and I just wouldn't even try.
So you're not
because I'm
welcome.
not of the
Don't
blood
want
royal.
you. Not,
No,
I see.
I'm not welcome there. I will no doubt be mansplained to by several engineers after this show why I'm wrong and they're right, and I just need to change. Kieren, I wanted to pick up your geopolitical point because I think tinfoil hat firmly in place. I think I also sense an undercurrent here of, the geopolitical tensions are ramping up. Next year is going to be a big year with the 20th anniversary of the World Summit on the Information Society. There is a sense from the multi-stakeholder community that we have to use it or lose it with some of these institutions that were built in the 90s. So the sort of newfound enthusiasm for standardising in the IETF, I think it is right, because compared to the intergovernmental alternative, the ITU, you do get robust engagement. That sort of challenging atmosphere that I've just been deriding is actually incredibly important for getting good technical solutions too. But I think that there's probably some tactical rediscovery of the IETF that's going on from actors who can see the writing on the wall potentially if we don't make those multi-stakeholder institutions function better.
Kieren, tactical rediscovery.
I think that's right. I also think, sort of being a slightly more positive frame of mind, I think it's like we're rediscovering what worked and why it worked. And my hope is, and you're right, there are cultural issues in the ITF, but we are talking about them a lot more these days. And so my hope is if this does become increasing relevance, if people are inputting more into this, that the organization, those components of the organization will have to change. The people bringing in these new standards are younger. They have a different generation. They have a different mindset, and they won't put up with some of the behaviors from the older generation. So I'm hopeful that this sort of increased focus on getting these standards through the IETF and using that process will bring with it some cultural change.
So I'm not going to explain all these acronyms. Just to there's the bones of the internet, which are like ICANN, IGF, IETF, ITU, and people seem to be examining. And those organisations seem to be, well, I think with the exception of ICANN, those organisations seem to be sort of reviewing what they're doing and why they're doing it. ICANN, the only conversation I hear is that they want to sound like they're doing that. But the minute they engage with that, it seems to they retrench, would you say? But the others really seem to be trying to, we've got WSIS plus 20. I'm sorry to just use all these acronyms, but there seems to be a lot of examining going on, wouldn't you say, Kieren, about the value, the purpose of these organisations?
Society is going through a big rethink of the internet. We've got new laws to deal with social media. We've seen the impact that and we used to celebrate it when it sort of led to revolutions in the Middle East, but now we're having the impact on the Western societies as well. And so we're reevaluating the internet and how we do things. And we are looking back at these organizations that sort of help set it up and help run it, that have gone a little bit out of fashion. And I think people are rediscovering them and saying, well, actually, with some improvements and some tweaks, these could actually really help us reach the same understanding that we originally reached. And then hopefully have fewer laws, because more and more laws equals more and more problems.
And if that leads to a better internet for the consumer, better language scripting recognition, better security, more inclusion of women, that these don't become sort of just really hard little tech angry groups where the communication seems to be so angry, that's to be applauded. And I think it's good for any, wouldn't you say, industry, Emily, to review what it does and how it's doing it and its cultures and norms. Isn't that a sign of it growing up?
Yeah, I think it is. I think a big challenge for those organisations is with a global internet, with a multipolar world where ideologies are very different. How do we accommodate for that? How do we make sure that those multi-stakeholder communities function in bringing people together who wouldn't normally sit together without being overly naive to the ideological differences and the differences of approach from different countries. Very, very difficult to do.
We'll watch this
I
space.
want to just jump in on that is also if we do include more women into these organizations, and they're coming, I hope, and oh God, I'm going to horribly stereotype, but women tend to be much better at talking outside of their groups and doing the socialization, which is so important in getting complicated things done. Whereas the engineers are typically middle-aged white men who are notorious for putting everything into a box and talking to that box and then talking to that box. So I'm hopeful with the introduction of more women in these situations that we'll end up with a model that just works better.
Thank you for being brave enough. Those women are going
to have to be very resilient.
Thank you for being brave enough to say that, although I do agree with both of those points. It's fantastic. So we're nearly out of time. We've got time for a couple more things. Please like us, follow us, share. We need you. We love doing this and we want to keep on doing this. Before we wrap up, Voice of God, do we have a comment of the week? Last 2 weeks you said no.
We do have a comment of the week this week. This is from ShawnyBoy3 on YouTube. This is in response to the British Airways CEO outsourcing their IT work to India, I think you said. And this comment says, "This same leader will get a job elsewhere and repeat it. I worked somewhere where someone came in and did the same thing, made mass cuts in specialist knowledge. It was done because that leader wanted to show on his CV that he could transform a company to get the CEO role elsewhere. Look at the cost savings I made, and look, I can make tough decisions."
ShawnyBoy3, the first thing I'm going to say as an engineer is I applaud you and totally agree with you, but my colleagues here have ribbed me for ranting.
I have seen this behavior. I mean, it's not as simple as that, but there's certainly an element. This is what ShawnyBoy3 is saying is definitely a manifestation of a bigger problem with a sort of a cadre of people that are CEOs and CFOs.
And to ShawnyBoy3, thank you for your comment. And thanks, everyone. There's been a lot of comments this week, especially about watches, Lucien. But I was speaking to someone...
I love that the watch repair mafia got to Lucien.
Yeah, they got to him.
Not the mafia, the watch repair nice people who are nice. I've actually bought a watch this week to apologise.
But to Shawnee Boy's point, I was talking to somebody from an organisation who are now trying to insource a cybersecurity function that has been outsourced, and they just don't have any of the skills that they need even to build those those functions back in. So sort of eliminating those highly skilled workforces within a company has incredibly long-term effects.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we could really, really go on and on about this. I tell you, I've got loads I'd like to say. Anyway, thank you. We have been discussing the British minister, the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, telling NATO that Russia is waging a cyber war. We've also been talking about the Uber app and experiences.
How fine you are and about
where we've moved since 2022 in our experiences as an organisation with the Uber app, and me particularly. And the IETF, it was the past, is it now the future? Kieren's been talking about that. Thank you very much. That was the Internet Seriously.